There you go.
Thanks, Bronwyn.
Of course.
So on that note, here is the definition that I think we all came up with.
Ursula, can you enlarge the print, please, for these old eyes?
Absolutely, absolutely. How's that? Awesome.
I have a comment whenever people are ready to talk.
I think we're ready, Tina. Go right ahead.
In the very first part where it says local scoring includes people familiar with geographic, cultural, social, etc. I just want to make sure, and then it says people working within close proximity of the candidates whose work is being scored. I just want to be sure that we're also, the nature of this is that people who are preparing candidates are engaged in the local scoring. It's not just, graduate students or other people in the institution or teachers or people familiar with the contexts or the district, et cetera, but it really also needs to include the faculty and the cooperating teachers who are working with candidates.
Excellent. Thank you, Tina. Any other comments? All right. So now that we have that common understanding of what we mean when we say local scoring, let's get it moving here with our recommendations.
Did y'all receive the slides from Juliet?
Well, I think
I don't have anything,
probably
so
you
I'm
could
just
just take
checking.
notes like in a Google Doc or something, and then when you get it, you can just copy it and transfer over.
Okay, thank you.
So on that note, do we want to review the current recommendations?
Yeah, I think we're looking at 6 different ones. So let's look at those. Adam, can you help us? We don't have the slides yet from Juliet to take notes into.
Yep.
Thank you.
I will go ask her. I'll be right back.
Thank you.
And once again, just to clarify our task, it is to streamline each of these recommendations and or possibly combine some.
Yeah, there were 4 options. Mandy, do you want to repeat those 4 options for the group?
Yeah, so we could either just edit them within themselves, we could combine some, we could eliminate one or two. And then our fourth option
Just
was
leave it.
To accept it as is, right?
Yeah.
So accept it as it is, tweak it and adjust it, combine it with another one, or eliminate it. So those are the 4 options. All right, so on that note, here is our first recommendation. And I just want to remind everyone that you do have this handout. It was emailed from Juliet yesterday evening. So I was going to go through them one by one, but I don't want to interrupt the flow. Do you want me to share that screen, or do you prefer to take some time to review it on our own and then talk?
Madam Chair, sorry to interrupt. You should have all just received an email with a link to the Google slide deck if you're a member of the work group. Does anybody not see that? We good? Thumbs up from someone? Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you.
So Ursula, with respect to your question, I would vote that we spend some time looking at this document since we just got it last night.
Okay.
So we can
Let's do
see other
that then.
people's comments and
Yeah. Okay, let's do that. So everyone, just a reminder, we received the email from Juliet yesterday. And I believe it's the fourth handout. It's labeled item 3A, focus area 4, consolidated recommendations. So I'll just be sitting here in the background, and when you're ready, if you can use your icons and give us a thumb up, and that way we can see how much time we need. Okay?
Right.
And
And we
we're
just need,
only going, sorry.
oh yeah, Vanessa, I was just going to say, we're just focusing on 1 through 7.
1
Okay.
through 6. I think
1
it's
through
1 through
6.
6.
Sorry.
Thank you. Same
Thanks.
question.
Thank
Great.
you. I'm going to print mine real quick.
Just to wait to make sure as well that everybody received the link to the slideshow. Okay.
Mhm.
checking in. I saw Mandy's thumbs up, Tina's thumbs up. I see Matt's. It'll take like maybe 2, 3 more. Okay, thank you. Everyone has had a chance to look through those recommendations. Let's hear any ideas or thoughts for those 4 choices, either leaving it to stand as it is, modifying it slightly, combining it with another, or eliminating it.
Are we starting with number 1?
Mhm.
Could on this one, I'm wondering, might we look at number 1 and number 3 together? Because they may be able to be
Related.
combined. Yeah, they're
Okay,
related.
let's see. Give me a minute. Does anybody have it up that you could share it on the screen?
I do.
Okay, perfect. Thank you, Mandy.
Okay. So this is 3, talking about the assessment design standards being updated to include local scoring. And number 1,
That a portion be locally scored.
and I'm assuming, Tina, you're talking about just putting it in after the parentheses before it talks about in accreditation programs.
Uh,
I asked for some clarification on recommendation 1. So just reading this, I'm just wondering, would this portion, is the recommendation that this portion, whatever the portion is, be specified for all programs, or is it just left up to programs to determine what portion of the TPA will be locally scored, or is that something that isn't necessarily considered in this recommendation?
I think it's something we need to define, and it's part of our job right now.
Mhm.
yeah, I
I
think.
would go ahead,
Oh,
Tina. Sorry.
I was just going to add, Devin, I think that's exactly what we need to figure out. And I think the difference between 1 and 3 is they're both saying that programs need to locally score. So that's why I thought they could be combined. But then I think we can decide together what we think that means. Like, what do programs actually need to do? Do they need to score is it all only local scoring?
Yeah,
Uh,
I don't think we'd want to do that because I realize there's going to be a lot of logistical issues with doing that. For me, the point of being involved in any degree in local scoring is the learning that happens, right? About the assessment itself, about how they can support candidates. So I'm going to just throw a percentage out there. Shoot me down. My feelings won't be hurt. But I'm thinking maybe we would start with 10%. So institutions would score 10% of their TPAs.
And how is that decided and who gets that information and where is it sent to?
And are you saying 10% of candidates and then they score the full TPA for 10%
So,
of candidates?
yeah, so in other words, if they have 100 candidates, they would score 10 of those.
End of the
Or the full
entire
assessment?
TPA or
The entire TPA. So they would score those 10 TPAs. And then we would ensure that faculty's involved, clinical supervision, people are involved. I don't know. Do you think that's too low of a threshold, too high of a threshold? What are your
rather than
thoughts?
looking at the number of candidates, I read this to understand a portion of the actual assessment, the actual TPA. So is that not
Ah,
what you're?
I like that.
I
That's a
think
different idea. I hadn't thought about that, Devin.
I I think it says both in this one. And I think there is, and again, we need to figure out how we word this, but I think there's value in some flexibility. And I speak from experience when we used to do local scoring with PACT. Um, we always had to do scoring with all of we scored all the TPAs in the program. And so we each had to become trained in the different content areas. So that's one thing with a percentage of candidates. We also need to identify probably not for the whole program, but for the credential areas, because you want to make sure you're looking at all of them. But the second thing is when we were scoring, sometimes when we were doing other data work, it became more valuable to have a group of people looking at, let's say, like we noticed, for instance, the concept of assessment in the beginning was a very difficult one for candidates. And we really wanted to improve that area in our program. And so we had a whole bunch of faculty get together and look at all of our candidates' work just on that one task, for instance. Um, so I think ideally we have some flexibility in this. We just need to figure out how to word it.
Or could we say something like, the RDI TPA work group recommends that institutions score a segment of a TPA instead of a portion? Or do we want to say a portion, meaning 25% or 10% of their TPAs? I hear what you're saying, Tina. And if it's about the learning of the faculty, I like that thought. I'm just struggling with how we would phrase it here.
Yeah, but I think I'd love to hear from other work group members too. Do you agree with that, or do you think we should be more everybody needs or a whole TPA needs to be scored always? Because there is certainly value and importance in that too.
I see
So,
Shayna's hand.
okay,
Go ahead,
great.
Shayna.
Yeah, so as we're talking, I something that I'm wondering about. If you don't mind scrolling to the recommendation at the very beginning, the list of the recommendations, I went back and I was reading, not the up some more, please, up, all the way there to the focus area 4, where it says recommendations for how programs can engage in local scoring. And what I sort of this is different than what I've been thinking, so I'm not sure this is the way we want to think about it. But one of the things that came up for me as I was reading this is that what this is asking it is really how, which to me is what are the ways in which programs might engage in local scoring. And that offers an option. Like we might say, here are 5 different ways that programs can engage in local scoring. The other thing that I noticed is we jumped right to requiring it. This doesn't actually say we need to necessarily require it. What it's asking us to do, at least in this language, is to provide options for how people might or for how programs might engage in this process. So I guess something that came up for me today that hadn't come up to me or occurred to me in the past. And especially as I was reading the comments where folks were saying, I like the spirit of this, but there were constant sort of, or there were themes of questions around like the implications of actually putting this into practice. So it made me actually question: do we want to require? And I mean, if are we recommending that everyone has to? If the purpose is to really understand the assessment, is this the only way to do that? Because if we're requiring it, we're saying that this is the way that people have to, or that programs have to achieve the goal. So anyways, one question I have is that do we feel that we need to require all programs to do local scoring? And then the second question I have is the language really asking us to provide sort of boundaries around a myriad of possible ways in which a program can engage in local scoring and provide options rather than very specific definitions of how they must. And as a program, like I'm sort of grappling with, if I had to do this, what the implications would be for my program, and it'd be very difficult, sort of financially and logistically, to engage in some of the ways that we're saying that we're mandating, or that we're recommending that folks are mandated to engage. And I do believe in the spirit. So anyhow, I'm just kind of grappling with those things as we move forward.
Thank you, Sheena. Vanessa, did you have a comment?
Everything Shayna said. This is that was exactly what I was trying to allude to before, and in the spirit of program improvement, who is getting this information? How are we disseminating it? And are we moving towards requiring? Because recommendation 3 requires local scoring, and I don't feel completely confident in that aspect of recommendation 3. Yeah, that was, and everything else Sheena said was what I was going to ask and include.
Thank you.
I agree.
Mandy.
I guess I'm going to kind of throw other thoughts into the mix. So previously, we discussed and put forward a recommendation that the TPA would be embedded in the program. So it's in the coursework, right? And it's supposed to be formative. So they're getting feedback on it that's more immediate. And I'm just trying to figure out if it's not locally scored, meaning the teacher who's teaching it in the class, who gives the assignment, because it's supposed to replace the assignments in the class, if they're not the ones grading it and they're not giving it back pretty much immediately, how is it formative if it's not locally scored by the person who's actually assigning it in the coursework? I guess I'm just struggling with, if we're making it a piece of and it's only certain people and it's not necessarily the people teaching it, is it valid? Is it authentic? Is it formative? And is it really embedded, which was one of our other recommendations? I kind of see number 1, number 3, and number 5 all at odds with each other in this list of recommendations. So I think we're going to have to wrap our head around 1, 3, and 5, combine them somehow into one, whatever we collectively decide as a group. But right now, where it stands, 1, 3, and 5 are competing.
Dana, I really liked what you shared, and I think that that's a good way to consider this, right? Is to not require that it be locally scored, but present options for what institutions could do. Tina?
I'm just going to add to the questions or information. In focus area 3, with respect to the accreditation system, we have a lot in there about what we want programs to do with respect to analyzing TPA data and looking at that. And if people do not have any experience with scoring and using the rubrics, that's going to be a difficult thing to do. That said, that doesn't necessarily require that they're formally trained and actually engage in local scoring, but they do need some training around using rubrics, and they need some training around what the evidence is and looks like, both for embedding, I believe, and for looking at data and making sense of it.
Thank you, Tina. Vanessa?
Quick question. Could we have, or could we ask that the model sponsors provide all of these things for each of the sites, and then we're not caught for funding, and instead the TPA model sponsors are the ones that are responsible for making sure that they're they're using the money that they're getting from everyone paying for the assessment so that everyone who takes on this particular TPA is trained and informed and doing all of that so that we're off the hook for funding that? Is that a question that we can ask the model sponsors for or the program models for? Like for when we're doing all of these training type things, it comes from the TPA that we're using. We're choosing this TPA for a reason, and now you help us train our people. Is that a thing or no?
I mean, I think that's what's happening now.
Yeah,
Is it?
it
Okay,
is.
because it seems like institutions now are like trying to figure out how to fund all of these local scoring things and all of these other options. Is it something that we can just require that the model, the programs pay for?
Which I think they currently are paying for that for the centralized scorers. But I think the notion of the idea that Vanessa's sharing is that we take it a step further so that they can offer, I don't know, maybe quarterly trainings for faculty or something to that effect. Is that correct, Vanessa?
Yeah, well, just something that it takes some of the financial burden off of the institutions and then goes back to we're using your model and you should make sure that we're all well informed for passing rates. I don't know.
So the language currently is that model sponsors are required to provide all of the materials and do the trainings and collect the data, et cetera. So they are treating scorers from an institution the same way they are treating all of the scorers that come from anywhere to engage in training, et cetera. So they do provide that. I think where the cost comes in for the institution has to do with both in kind, faculty time, structuring things within a quarter or a semester or a day or whatever it is for people to do that work instead of something else they might do, or even compensating individuals in the program who do scoring, which comes with a whole host of complications in universities, especially public universities. You can't give faculty extra money for any of these things. Typically, there's some categories of faculty who are not permanent or tenure track who can get. So there's all sorts of who can get stipends, for instance. But anyways, there's a lot of complications with if you actually pay faculty, which a lot you can't. And there's a lot of complications with how do you fit it into a program structure that require, structural changes and organizational changes. There's a lot of other complications with respect to faculty in universities are promoted. Tenure and promotion is not based on whether you are scoring TPAs. They're based on a lot of other things. They're based on your teaching evaluations. They're based on the research that you do. They're based on your contributions in service to the university, community, state, et cetera. So it's going to require, I think, some structural changes in our promotion and tenure system, which is going to be a really difficult thing. But anyway, that's a way more.
So then my next thought is then maybe if we're asking for programs to engage in local scoring and inform program improvement, maybe we just are more direct with the model sponsors and saying you must provide X, Y, and Z opportunities to engage. I'm not sure how to move forward. Yeah, just throwing some ideas out there.
I think the reality of what comes with local scoring is it's like an onion peeling back the layers. Tina, you described a lot of the variables that institutions of higher education face. And so I don't feel comfortable recommending that it be required of institutions, recognizing that, that's going to mean a whole host of things that would have to happen. Shayna and then Rebecca.
I really appreciate this discussion. And what's coming up for me is, Mandy, your comment about embedding the assessment within coursework. And I think there are um, there are things or there are opportunities or possibilities that may not require a hefty amount of additional funding or navigating some of the sort of employment trickiness that it might be if we said everybody needs to score, you know, the NTPA as it currently exists. Um, I mean, I'm just sort of thinking about like if I agree, like if there are tasks that are contributing to the assessment, even maybe helping candidates prepare for the assessment that are embedded in course, of course, those faculty of those courses are going to score those assessments. And maybe that is a way that we can say, yes, that is considered local scoring. But if we're talking about, I think it just sort of depends on how we are thinking about the assessment itself. If we're thinking that the NTPA as it is, or the Cal TPA or whatever the assessment as it is, the final product has to be scored locally. That is different than saying a faculty member can score assignments in the courses that they teach. And so I just think that there are different ways in which we can think about what local scoring could look like that could provide options for us that wouldn't be necessarily cost prohibitive and cause some of these barriers. So I'm thinking about Mandy, your comment, and then Tina, your comment about training, because yes, those faculty members, if they are contributing to that work, should be knowledgeable about the assessments that their work is actually contributing to.
Rebecca?
I was also going to go back to Mandy's comment, and I think that it's important to reconcile, and maybe we need to clarify what embedded means. Does that mean that the task that you need to submit is completed in your coursework and then submitted to, you know, whomever, and they score your official thing? Or as an instructor, I score that assessment and it counts for your TPA? Like, I don't know what embedded in the program, you know, how that.
So I was on a visit recently, just very recently this week, and that was what an institution was doing, is they were assigning this, the professor was giving appropriate feedback, and the candidate was then uploading it. I mean, that's like the ideal situation, right? Where, you know, it's embedded. And so I think if there's a way to strengthen the understanding of the system, that's what we mean when we say embedded. I think that's very doable. But I think if we're going to impose local scoring across the state of California, I think that may come with some challenges.
I think when we did the embedding section, we already made two recommendations. The first recommendation was that the entirety of the TPA be broken up into smaller tasks so that it could be embedded more properly. And we've already made the recommendation that it be in the coursework and that candidates submit that section during the coursework. And so I think it would be remiss in this moment to then say that that faculty member doesn't need to assess it. I think they should. I think they should score the section that's part of their class.
But isn't that a conflict of interest? If that faculty is going to score those exams, then, I mean, if I'm a faculty member, I'm going to think, you know, I'm going to lean toward them passing. Go ahead, Tina.
I was just going to add to this conversation to say there are the bias factor and the calibration factor is a critical one. So if it's only course instructors scoring their own assessments, that gives information, and I think formative information is critically important, and that's what they do here. I'm just going to go back to why we are here with this local scoring issue. And one of the reasons I think the work group is here is because of the criticisms for the TPA that have become so far removed from what's happening in programs that faculty and programs think of it as a barrier and not something that is a part of what they do. And it's not embraced by programs often as, you know, what they do. And good information for them, etc. And part of the reason for that is a lot of the people who are preparing candidates don't know a whole lot about what the evidence is that they're seeking, how the scoring works, what the candidates are actually doing, and what they can learn from it. And that's why I think this whole discussion around local scoring has come back. I think I think that's one thing for us to remember. The second thing I think for us to remember is somebody was mentioning TPAs as they stand currently. We have made suggestions for the TPA changing, and it certainly will need to change with the onset of AI and the differences of things happening. It will also need to change, I think, because the current TPA has become so big and so overbuilt that we've suggested that it gets broken down more. I think also the suggestion that there be more flexible components to it is in there. So this is all to say it might be very difficult for us to specify particular things about what the local scoring should be and look like until we know what the performance assessment should be and look like.
Or could we recommend that another work group work on this issue after the TPA is updated for AI and all of that, so that it's looked at again? I know it seems like I'm just kicking the can down the road, but I don't think we can make recommendations that are appropriate given that it is going to need to be updated.
Well, we might not be able to make specific recommendations, but I think our recommendations could align with, decisions around the assessment that will happen at some point.
So we've got 15 minutes left.
Oh, gosh.
How do we want to proceed? Juliet, we just realized we've been discussing and we have 15 minutes left, so we know that.
I heard. I was just checking in to see how you all were doing.
Thank you. So what are the group's thoughts with these next 15 minutes? How would we like to proceed? I heard an idea of considering item 1, 3, and 5 that are competing ideas, and then kind of, for lack of a better term, picking a side.
Idea.
What are other thoughts that are out there for how we can approach this work?
Yeah. I mean, I think we spent so much discussion and there's so much confusion and so many issues, I think, with just recommendation number 1. I think we need to be clear, specific, and deliberate. If we're going to combine those, let's find something that's actually doable, that falls in line with all the previous comments that have been made, because everybody's made some pretty good comments, but we really haven't finalized or determined a direction for anything one way or another. So I think focusing on trying to come up with a specific, whether it's eliminate, I mean, I'm okay with, because with 1, 3, and 5, I'm okay with eliminating one and focusing on another one that's a lot more doable.
Yeah, I think that's I don't know if I should jump in here, but I think considering what could be eliminated is totally fair. And with that, I'll jump out.
Could we say to eliminate recommendation 3, as it's the only one that says it's a requirement for local scoring? I don't know how everyone feels about that, but it's the only one that says it's a requirement.
I'm not comfortable taking the requirement of local scoring out, but I mean, I can vote just a strong oppose if I need to do that for the recommendation, right? But I don't understand how it could possibly be embedded and formative if the people teaching it aren't scoring it in some way.
I agree. Oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Tina.
I think we need to define what we mean by local scoring. I think the problem with recommendation 2 is local scoring isn't defined well. And it means a lot of different things to a lot of different people.
So let's just try to hammer that out. What do we mean then when we say local scoring? Sorry, Vanessa.
Oh, that's okay. I was gonna say, could we go to recommendation 5 and adjust it to say including local scoring? So faculty embed TPA, provide timely and meaningful feedback through local scoring option or through, and then recommend that local scoring be put into here.
I mean, it says score the TPA. We could add the word locally.
Yeah, and then combine 3 and 5 in that way.
We could, but my criticism of recommendation 5 is it's very broad, and I think it occurs in some of the other focus areas. I mean, I'm not sure that this is actionable. There's so many different pieces to it.
Especially when 40% were neutral on this one.
I like Shayna's comments from earlier where she's like, is it our, perhaps we brainstorm, when we say, what do we mean by local scoring? More or less, the types of local scoring that we could imagine might be where we start.
So then
Like,
show the notes, Rebecca, so we can start working on that. So when we say local scoring, can you repeat that, Tina?
that we might brainstorm what local.
Whoever's sharing the screen, can you stop so that Rebecca can share her screen?
Using two computers, so it's like
So
Okay.
notes on the different computer.
And
Sorry, go
maybe
ahead, Tina.
add this to recommendation 3 as the include local scoring as a requirement for the TPA. Local scoring includes blah, blah, blah.
or can include. And I don't know that we are going to get to the point where we decide exactly what it is, but I think we should throw out some brainstorms. We already have people have said some things. Let's list, the kinds of things that local scoring could be that we think is valuable to do the things that we want it to do. Mandy, you described one thing. If a portion of the TPA is embedded in a class, then there should be people associated with that class who are scoring it, for instance. That's one idea. What are other ideas? Ursula, you threw out 10% of the candidates in the program should get locally scored. What are some other ideas?
Also, going back to defining locally scoring, is that scoring their materials for the class? Is that scoring them for the purposes of what the Cal TPA requires, the CTC's official, assessment? And how would that work?
That's an important distinction. I agree.
Could both of those be possibilities? Like maybe your faculty are all trained to be scorers for and score the official product that gets turned into or submitted to Pearson, for example. That's a possibility, not a requirement. That could be one way.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder if we can also include the requirement that all folks who do engage in local scoring are received some sort of training in calibration, that needs to happen.
Yes, I would also combine with something that we talked about in the accreditation work that there might be a scoring light training or a scorer training light, which is not just saying, here's the TPA tasks and rubrics, go study them, but a collaborative session where you're learning how to use the rubrics and look at candidate work vis-a-vis the rubrics. Um, I
Recommendation 1 already defines portion of the assessment to be locally scored, and it says could be interpreted to indicate one task or a percentage of the candidate submissions. So if we're open to either one,
Or both, actually,
Or
provide
both,
options.
is
Provide
fair.
options.
Yeah, I think the options are somewhat important for programs. We don't want to. One thing I always struggle with, and I've always struggled with on the commission, is how we create policy that works for everyone, that both ensures programs that are not doing a good job to do a better job, but also allows programs that are doing a good job to have some flexibility around what they want to do as they're continually growing their work. That is one of the hardest things, I think, about creating policy.
Any other ideas other than these three that surface? Tina, did we miss anything here?
Well, I think it could be the total of the that the entire TPA is scored within a program, which is
Yeah,
included here.
And I love that this provides choice, right? So that institutions can choose which one they want to do.
perhaps. I don't know yet. Me personally, I don't know whether we just let everybody choose, but maybe there is something combined with accreditation based on where a program is. If there's something problematic, then maybe programs need to do X with local scoring, or I don't know. I mean, I still.
Yeah. Because as it currently stands, institutions have a chance to score locally, but no one has opted to score locally.
Correct.
But we don't give candidates a choice of whether they have to take it or not, right? I guess that's the part I keep coming back to that's really frustrating because we're here because the candidates are struggling with the experience. Even the ones who are passing are still coming out saying that it destroyed their lives. And so
Yeah. It's
this
9:56.
if
We've got
we're
like
giving it a
4 minutes.
choice,
We've got like 4 minutes left.
I hear you, but if we're giving choice for scoring, I'm wondering why we're not giving choice for taking it or a portion of it.
I'm going to add
Thank you,
one more
Mandy.
thing to that, Mandy, which I completely agree with you on. One thing with mandating is if it would require, in an ideal world, it would require our institutions of higher education to take this work seriously, to take teacher education seriously in the context of their institutions. And structures have to change to do this work well. You can't just pay faculty and graduate students and cooperating teachers to score the tasks and leave it the way it's being done right now. That's not what local scoring should be, but
And so are we saying this will replace all of the other recommendations? Are we saying this is going to be combined with a couple of the other recommendations?
I think we were looking at 1, 3, and 5.
If you agree with we're looking at 1, 3, and 5, use your thumbs up. I see Vanessa's thumbs up. I see
yeah,
Devin's thumbs up. Okay, good. Everybody except a couple. The couple that are not on 1, 3, and 5, I'd love to hear from you in terms of what your thoughts are.
I'm just still looking. I'm going back to look at them.
Okay.
Because 2 is about resubmissions, 4 is about funding structures.
all right.
Yeah, I agree.
Thank you, Shayna.
Do we want to just vote on 2 and 4?
Eliminating 2 and 4.
Well, like, do we need these? Do we want to change these? Are these easy? Like, yes, we'll keep them and let's say we need time to work on 1, 3, and 5.
Well, recommendation 2 says that programs score their candidates resubmissions. Is that not going to be eliminated in the nature of the one that we're saying everyone's going to, they're going to do all of them anyway?
Well, I would say that if we ended up on recommendation 1 saying 100% has to be scored locally, then yes, 2 is unnecessary because it's implied, right? But if 1 is choice and only a percentage, then I think 2 is still relevant. So it depends what we do, I think, with 1, 3, and 5.
I agree, because if you think of how Tina laid out what they did as an institution, said we want to focus here. What if an institution focuses on an area where their students are all passing? So they need to look at the areas that are not passing.
I think if we leave this, all of the comments say roughly the same thing. Is in order to eliminate bias, we need to be sure that there's a double scoring protocol that accompanies this if we include this.
Which we could add into the recommendation, right?
Yeah.
Or is that part covered in our accreditation requirements, saying like the universe or the program would have to justify how they're using their candidates' pass rates to inform their program development? Then do we need to further lay it out here, or is it covered in what we've done?
Juliet, are you coming to tell us we have to be done?
I'm just checking on the time.
We still have a fair amount of work to do, I think.
Okay.
We're wrestling.
Yeah.
Okay.
What do you suggest?
I guess keep going. It was aspirational timing. So, and none of the groups are finished. So
Okay.
let me check. I'll check in with them as well and then circle back.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Thanks.
Tina, if you don't mind, can you repeat what you just said? I just wanted to kind of process that a little better.
Shoot, what did I just say? What were we just talking about?
Something about the way that the program standards are currently written, and like, do we need to actually specify this if it's covered? There was something you said about that. Like, I don't know if that's helpful.
Gosh, I can't remember. Does anybody else remember?
I can't remember what you were saying, but it triggered a thought in my head that made me go back to initial focus area 4, where it says local scoring of the assessment to inform program improvement. And so I think part of our recommendations need to talk about what is happening specific to program improvement with local scoring.
I don't know if it was the comment with respect to a double scoring or calibration or that required for resubmissions. Were we talking about that, or was it something else?
I think it was, and you mentioned something about like programs needing to justify the ways in which they're maybe it was like justification of how they're using the assessment to drive program improvement. I'm
That
trying
sounds
to.
right.
Okay.
That sounds like it, Shayna. That sounds like it.
I'm wondering if that's the opportunity and area for a little more flexibility in the program improvement section. I'm cautiously saying that, of course, right? Because I don't want programs to only review the sections that their candidates are all successful at. But I'm wondering if that's the area where we can offer a little more flexibility, where programs choose what they're analyzing and demonstrating that to the accreditation team, as opposed to the options being whether or not you locally score.
Yeah, I think our work is impacting the field already, because that accreditation visit that we were on, there was a TPA coordinator, and she was asking hard questions about the TPA. And it was good to see that.
So, Mandy, I think what you're suggesting is that all programs must engage in some form of local scoring, and that engagement should sort of through the accreditation process, programs will have to justify or argue why or how that form of engagement then supports program improvement. Is that what you're suggesting?
Yeah, yeah, demonstrate
Mhm.
things
Mhm.
they've changed, right, to improve their program based on data.
That's nice.
I think I like that as well. And I think we, again, might define parameters for what constitutes local scoring and what we want to see. And I think one of the most critical aspects is collaborative work. That local scoring doesn't mean what it means. Scoring locally doesn't mean what scoring the TPA now means, which is you sit in front of a computer screen by yourself, you learn from the training modules how to score, and then you score a bunch, you submit it, done. That's not what local scoring means, I don't think. So it should absolutely involve a collaborative component where multiple people are looking at the same work and making sense of it vis-a-vis the rubrics, et cetera.
Then,
So maybe in addition to identifying different models, we identify criteria. So I'll just throw out collaboration, scoring common sets of work. And then reliability standards met, whatever that is going to be. Score reliability.
inter-rater reliability.
Mm-hmm.
We look at what our colleagues, all of the boats say. Okay, so there's a bunch of things. When I go back to this, what I think is coming through here is that if I am your instructor in a teacher preparation program, I assign you a portion of the TPA to be completed in my course, and then I score it to provide you immediate feedback. I'm just not sure if we mean, I don't want to get back in there and everybody else say, wait, that's not how I understood it and what I voted on. And I'm not sure that I don't want to, I'm not saying I disagree with anything we said. I'm just trying to think through representing everybody. And
I think there was a lot of interpretation in these
yes,
original recommendations. So the scoring is we kind of have to take as just advice because how I read it might have been different from how you read it. when we were going through that first vote. And I think that's the point of today, is trying to clarify what it means so that
Okay.
when we vote the next time, we're all clear what we're voting on.
Mhm.
I'm wondering, I don't think Devin has had the opportunity to say anything.
Well, or Matt, I was going
Or
to ask.
Matt.
Well,
I
Yeah.
was just
I
going to
mean,
go back to what Devin said, though, because that's exactly what you all were talking about here. Devin, you said, what are we talking about? Are we talking about the formative tasks, or are we talking about the official TPA task itself? Right?
yes. And the more discussion that we've had, the more cloudy this whole recommendation has become. And so I'm really struggling with the specifics of this particular recommendation. And I mean, I understand how it came about, but there's so many different avenues. It's so complicated to really narrow down and come to a definitive conclusion or a recommendation that works for everybody, because there's so many factors involved. When we're thinking about local scoring, I'm uncomfortable with the whole mandating or requiring, because then the burden falls on the program to make it work regardless. And some programs just don't have the capacity to make something like that work. And so I like the idea of providing those options. So these are some recommendations. This is how we define local scoring, by providing these options. So something like, just to make it simple, I think we're overcomplicating it, because there are so many factors and so many moving parts involved in this. So I'm just kind of sitting back, and the more I'm thinking about it, the more confused and frustrated I'm getting, because I mean, we've been working for an hour and we still really haven't done much but discuss all the different avenues and ideas and things like that. And so that just complicates it a whole lot more. So I'm just thinking of, kind of making it very clear, very simple, defining it, kind of going back to what Shayna had mentioned early on, and providing those options and examples, and saying, this is what we recommend that programs have the option. I mean, they do have the option now, but making it a little bit more easy for them to locally score, which includes these things, the things that, Rebecca has already listed on the document as possible options. I don't know. There's just so much happening, and I'm just kind of like, and I think of how this applies. We already have the secondary passing standard where, if they miss it by, it's like 3 points, I think it calculates out to be, we have a committee that we review the material. It's almost like a local scoring in itself, so they don't have to resubmit. So we have that option, and so there's other things that are at play that make it a little bit more difficult to actually come up with a clear recommendation for local scoring. And so I'm just kind of sitting back, just kind of taking it all in, and just wondering, how do we get to a conclusion? How do we come to, let's make one recommendation that kind of encompasses everyone's ideas? And I don't think we can, because there's so many different parts and so many different people involved in it. We talked about bias already exists as it currently stands. We have evidence that, the TPA models already have bias. From my personal experience, bias exists in the training or the calibration that assessors go through. Bias exists with looking at the countless condition codes that are, possible. And so, I mean, I try to make it as simple as possible at our institution. And so if anything happens related to the TPA, it falls on my shoulders. And so I try to streamline it just to make it as easy as possible. So some of the things that are already been stated, we've implemented. So I work with faculty. I provide all the professional development. I provide all the training, all the instruction related to our TPA. I work with our faculty individually to ensure that they are able to embed parts of the TPA in their coursework that makes sense. So it's not seeming like something that's forced. We go through, they know the expectations of the TPA. And so all the parts of the TPA that the candidates need to complete, they're working on them in their courses as well. And so when they get to our final phase, they've pretty much completed the TPA. Now it's a way of packaging all that material to submit to Pearson. And so, we don't really have a problem with pass rates. We have a problem with submission rates because our candidates are just overwhelmed. They just don't submit. But a lot of this that's already been discussed, it's kind of, for us, it's like, okay, well, whatever happens, happens, because we've implemented a system that kind of works. And so, thinking about just thinking about embedding and requiring our candidates to do some local scoring or our faculty to do some local scoring, without funding for compensation and training, I can tell you now our faculty is going to be completely against it. Um, and there'll be no way they can say, you know what, you cannot require me to do this. The option's already there and they don't want to take it up. And so it falls on me. So I do all of that. So I'm just thinking if other institutions have a Cal TPA coordinator, all that information and local scoring will probably fall on that person's shoulders, which is a lot to take on. So I know I've been running off the mouth for a lot of stuff, but just those are just some of my thoughts as we continue to fight and try to navigate coming up with a recommendation.
I think you really coalesced a lot of my thoughts as well. And I think that there are kind of two ways of looking at this: the local scoring to benefit the candidate and local scoring to benefit the institution. And those things, our recommendation is going to be one or the other. Are we local scoring because we want the institution to use this as formative information to inform their program development? Are we saying local scoring because we want our candidates to get their feedback right away? And those things are both there. And then also those things are kind of covered in our previous recommendations. In embedding tasks, that's the benefits the candidate, also the institution, but then accreditation was all about that. How are we using the TPA to hold institutions accountable to improve their programs? I'm curious, like, I just don't know. I don't know.
And going back to, what Tina had mentioned, our initial charge and the reason why we're here, one of the reasons is because this TPA has become this barrier, this gatekeeper for a lot of candidates. And so how do we help them through that process? And I mean, there's so many ways you can approach that, and it takes a lot of time. And one of the things that we do is kind of what I call humanizing the TPA, which is eliminating this thought that is this huge, almost unaccomplishable task that we're required to do that's unrealistic. And so we make it realistic and we make it applicable, we make it formative. And so doing that in the program just kind of eliminates that whole argument as the CPA is a barrier. And so thinking about our charge here now with local scoring, what are we really trying to do? What are we really trying to say? So yeah, Rebecca, there's two pieces there, and you really can't have one without the other, but one's going to come first because we have to locally score in order to get the data to determine what improvements need to be made. And so that's not a piece that's easily implemented. And that's one of the things, for example, what we've done is over the last, I would say, few years, I've looked at the data and I've actually itemized and kind of looked at the specific rubric areas that our candidates scored low in, and we made an intentional, deliberate effort to focus on those areas and improve those in our program to improve those rates for the TPA sections in which they scored low in. And we just that's a consistent process, but and our faculty doesn't know that unless I share it with them. So I share that with our faculty, and they're more understanding and then deliberate and intentional about addressing those areas, which improves our pass rates and the success rates. And so, there's, like I said, there's so many different moving pieces and parts that affect so many different people and different things that are outside of our control. And granted, this is just a recommendation. We don't have to have all the answers.
But Devin, I think what you're describing is not happening consistently across programs.
Correct.
Right.
I mean, it sounds ideal, right?
And so that's where I say publish the scores. Publish the scores and let the market take care of itself. Because the programs that are doing a great job, guess what? Candidates will choose to go there.
So I'm going to jump in and say, is it possible for you all to be back in the main room at 10:30? No. Okay.
No, we haven't even drafted. I think we've kind of poked holes in every single one, but haven't started writing anything.
Well, and it seems like maybe just from what I've heard, sounds like you've had some really thoughtful conversations, and this might be where you're headed already, but to create a whole new recommendation that combines the best elements of all that's been proposed so far.
I think that's right. So I would also, it may be as I'm listening to everyone that 1, 3, and 5 are all ideas of things that we might put into a new recommendation, as well as the things that we've heard here. One of the things I am hearing is the difficulty with being super specific and with a requirement at this point in time. And going back to the idea that what several of you said, Amanda, you said too, we already have requirements that everything is embedded in programs. We already have requirements that programs are supposed to give feedback. We already have requirements that they're supposed to support candidates, et cetera. And it's working well in some programs and not working in other programs. And we saw in the field that when faculty were no longer looking at TPA documents or engaged in scoring, the problems began with respect to the TPA becoming such a separate entity and not supported well and all these sorts of things. And I believe it's become a big, huge burden to programs, even if they do it well. It's still a burden to programs. And that's, I think, part of our charge here. So I believe that there does need to be some element of local scoring, but that what that means can be broad. And at this point, perhaps we can just define what we mean by that. We could define some criteria that we think needs to be present, and we could define some models. But
Like,
at this
I'm
point,
sorry.
yeah, go ahead, Devin.
I'm sorry. I was just gonna say I like what Rebecca has on the screen right now. You know, what might local scoring look like? And
Right.
so that listing, I think is excellent. And I think that can be a recommendation in and of itself. You know, recommend that programs, reserve the right to choose one of these options for local scoring.
And I don't know if we even need to say that at this moment in time, but we can say here are some of the things that local scoring might look like. We think something needs to be included in programs like this. I don't know that I would be ready to say, go ahead and choose, or yeah, I'm just not quite sure. I would also add to the criteria something somebody said, which was scorer training.
And the reason I made the suggestion of programs choose is because the commission has given us the choice to determine how we move forward with a secondary passing standard, for example. So that option's out there. Every institution has something different. I've spoken to different representatives in different programs, and everybody does something different, but the commission has accepted that. So it gave them the choice and the option to say, you determine how best your candidates can demonstrate the understanding of these TPEs, the understanding of the Cal TPA requirements. So, rather than just kind of focusing on one, that was the only reason I kind of made that suggestion, because that's one of the options they have now.
I agree that there should be an element of choice. I'm just not sure yet whether these are the 4 things that we say here, you can choose. I also think that there might be a requirement via the accreditation process that says if programs, that the CTC might be able to say, hey, we're seeing a problem here, and so next year, this is what your program needs to do. But for programs that are doing well with the work and everybody's happy and they're utilizing it and they're learning from it and et cetera, go ahead and keep doing what you're doing.
Would we capture that recommendation for the accreditation process in this recommendation, Or would we capture that under the recommendations pertaining to accreditation?
I think we could write a sentence here. We have here, what might local scoring look like? Then we can have another recommendation that says, we believe there should be an element of choice in what local scoring looks like. And the decision around that choice can involve both programs and the CTC.
I wonder if maybe the word choice feels really open, and I wonder if there's a way to say that the element of local scoring must align with areas of programmatic improvement and or necessary areas for candidate development.
Great.
So,
Shana, will you just write that?
Something about areas of candidate development, Shana.
Yeah, areas of candidate development and program improvement.
Let's align with those. Yes.
Must align with whatever the sort of pathway of local scoring or whatever kind of local scoring the program is engaging with.
Did we say we were okay with recommendations 2 and 4 as is? Like,
No, we just said they didn't have to do with the 1, 3, 5.
Could we
Yeah,
go back
but
to that slide you were working on though, Rebecca? Because I don't, the RDI work around that TPPs should have flexibility to choose a method of local scoring. I think it's also, it's not.
Then I was going to say that, then I was going to say the Shana part, and then I was going to say might look like. But I also think going back to Ursula, like this is obviously we've been wrestling with this for almost an hour and a half. Oh wait, is that how long? But anyway, maybe an expert group needs to come together after everything else has been, all of our other recommendations have kind of shake them out and then see. But I don't.
I just want to make sure that Matt feels like he has a space to speak to. Is there anything you want to add?
Uh, um, I have enjoyed the conversation and appreciate people's various thoughts. I maybe want to echo what Devin was saying earlier. It seems like we've gone in lots of different directions and maybe have lost sight of what the main thing is. So trying to keep the main thing perhaps is important. Just as an example, I think early on, and someone spoke to this, I forget who. Some of us were talking about, I think, formative for students. Others were talking about formative for programs. And there's been other sorts of interesting places that we've maybe been coming at this from different ways. So, yeah, the only other thought I had maybe to add that hasn't been brought up, and I don't have an answer to this. It was just a wonder that I had is if we have um, maybe on the previous slide, I think one of the examples was having faculty or instructors maybe scoring a portion of a TPA. I just wondered if that sort of assembly line scoring would hurt or benefit candidates if you have different people looking at different parts of a TPA. So I don't know what I'm answer to that, but that was just a wonder that I had.
I'm wondering if somebody else can project, can open this slide deck and project it, and then I'll start typing on my bigger keyboard because I keep making mistakes because I'm using a tiny baby keyboard. Does that make sense? Or not?
Oh, sure.
If you go to your email and open the thing from Juliet, and then I'll switch to my other computer and type, but you'll still be able to see. Or we can, never mind, we can do it like this. I just have to not go back and forth.
So time check. Do you think you can have something ready to share in about 15 minutes? Mandy.
It totally can. It won't be finished. We can share things and we could be in the room,
Okay.
but we won't have anything to vote on, I don't think. Friends?
Okay.
Okay, Rebecca, do you want me to share
Yes,
these?
I'm going to take it down. Thank you.
So let's aim to be back at 10:45.
Okay, are you all seeing this?
We can see that. Will you go to slide 7?
Yeah.
I'm ready to hear your, just tell me what to write and I'll write it.
So what was it, Shayna, that you had said that aligns to program improvement and something else you said? Program improvement needs and
Something about candidates.
You said area of candidates needs
There we go.
or support, I think is what you said.
Sounds good.
candidate support or needs either.
Well, how about program needs and candidate support?
Well, we've got program improvement needs above. That is speaking of the program needs, right?
Okay.
And so this recommendation is necessary because why is it necessary?
I don't know though. I'm going to just push back a little bit on that the TPPs have all the flexibility in determining what they do. I think CTC via accreditation may have some stay in this as well.
Okay.
And the
And
reason
so I'm gonna push us to not wordsmith any further.
it's not just that piece though, is not just wordsmithing because again, I think programs are just sometimes programs are going to do not what's necessarily the best thing for the program or the
Yeah,
candidate.
yeah. Oh, I hear you. So go ahead.
Is it possible to replace the phrase should engage in flexibility to choose and replace that with should engage in a method of local scoring, engage in a method?
We could also say we develop this criteria and models. Work recommends that there is some flexibility in what local scoring looks like. Maybe that's just the overall sentence, and then we could have bullet points for what we recommend, which is that LS follows the criteria identified and criteria and models we identified. It aligns with areas of program improvement needs and candidate support. The worker recommends that there's some flexibility in what scoring looks like. And as long as we should refer back to the criteria and the models with that sentence, the worker recommends the flexibility. It's got to align with the criteria.
Both of these, should I?
Think we're getting back to where we initially started with adding more and building more and confusing and complicating things a lot more, um, and kind of focusing and having a recommendation develop.
Well,
I agree. I agree.
if we just refer back to this in the recommendation, because otherwise, what is this? I think our recommendation has to say it's got to meet this, local scoring needs to meet this criteria. And here are some models. I don't think we need to put the models in this recommendation. I think they
We've
here.
got about 10 minutes left before we jump back to the big group.
Devin, do you have an idea of how to complete the recommendation to make it make sense and be simplistic?
Happy with the way it started, but
So if it just ended at looks like, that's what you're saying?
and just refer to that next page with some options.
So do include.
Because I think we can spend a whole nother hour on this.
We totally can.
Yeah.
And remember, this is just a draft. We're going to have another opportunity to look at it again before we take our final recommendations forward.
And let me just clarify, is this new recommendation going to take the place of 1, 3, and 5?
I think so, because at the end of the day, after we read them, we moved on in the conversation to create this new thing. So I think the very nature of that is where we are.
Well, then I think that's fine to put that there. Can I just say,
Can you tell me how to say the criteria part?
yeah, I was just gonna do this, right? Does this work? I was just adding it. I can't see this anymore. It's gotten too
Sorry,
small.
I'm going to fix that. What?
Oh. Okay.
I'm going to take a bio break. I'll be right back. Is that okay to do? Okay,
I think it is, but I think you have to log off.
I'll be back.
So while they're wordsmithing that, recommendation 4 was just one sentence. And it just said, locally local scoring should be funded by the state. I don't think we should let go of that one just yet. But I heard some of the rationale for why that isn't necessary. But I don't think I'm comfortable just letting it go at the moment. Because at least it acknowledges there's a cost associated with, right?
Which recommendation is that one?
Number 4.
Thank you.
And then the other one we haven't dealt with is number 2, which is about resubmissions. And I guess I would go back to arguing that that one to me is really important to keep if we are not saying that the entirety of the initial needs to be locally scored.
But I agree with previous comments around it would need to be double scored.
I completely agree with that. Is that as simple as just adding the word double before the word score?
I think I don't know. I guess the idea is that we have to make sure that this is a reliable scoring, that there is, it could be double scored, but it just needs, or it could be double scored from outside the program as well, not just in the program.
This goes back to my question of, does this belong in our accreditation questions or recommendations? Because our goal here is to improve program.
Is it for the scoring the resubmissions? You think the goal is for improving the program? I mean, I'm asking that as a question. I can't remember why or how this one came about. Like, what was the reason why people want the program to score their candidates' resubmissions?
So it says it's necessary because localized scoring increases programs' opportunities to engage with the quality of their candidate submissions.
Mm-hmm.
But this is where, this is where the whole thing about local scoring, I feel like what we've talked about doesn't address this whole idea of having local scorers understand the context, like up in their very slide 2. Is it there? So like the geographic, cultural, and social context.
Yeah.
That's the point of the resubmission scoring being local.
Okay. So that in
I
case
think this came out of trying to address the financial issue of candidates having to pay to resubmit.
Uh-huh.
And I think that was another one of the reasons this came about.
Is this a form of like, is this one of the offerings for local scoring, or is this an addition to local scoring? Like you're already local scoring and you have to, and you should score resubmissions as well? Or is this scoring the resubmissions is one of the ways you can engage in local scoring so that you would only score the resubmissions?
If we keep them as 2 pieces, it's and.
It's and, okay.
So if recommendation 1 is a portion or all, depending on what a school wants to do, then 2 is saying, but all resubmissions have to be double scored by the program.
But I like Sheena's question, because what if that was one of the options a program chose? We will score all of our resubmissions. That's that's our definition of a portion.
I would be against that, but
Okay.
that's just me.
And I would be against that as well.
Okay.
And one reason is, the program I used to work for with 100 candidates, there might be 1 or 2 resubmissions. And I don't think we would learn enough from that as a program.
Okay. So we just leave 2 then?
We do need to, I think, say something about the double scoring, score their candidates' resubmissions.
I think you can just say programs double score their candidates' TPA resubmissions.
So it's all done internally.
Or I could just say meet, I don't know, what is it? I'm losing words here. Think about it. So they need to meet the standards for scoring. I don't think it can just be doubles. Okay, I'm just going to say there's another. I'll just say set by CTC, because there's another one later on that or one of our other recommendations talks about rate of reliability standards.
It's in the assessment design standards.
A verb there, Tina.
Thank you. Oh, thank you. Meet.
Yeah. Right. Are you all ready to head back?
We
What you have.
could. It was the state funding.
I think we are, Julia. I think so. We're getting there.
Yeah, recommendation 4, we haven't really had a chance to talk about, but should we just table that for the moment?
I would.
Yeah.
Should I write a
At
note
the
here?
top, just write still thinking or
Mm-hmm.
to be continued.
Yeah, I'm going to go back to the main
Keeping the
room.
slides
I'll
that
see
are
you all there.
necessary.
See you over there, Juliet. Great work. My goodness. We did nearly the impossible, people. Yay.
I mean, this is a hard one.
And then who's going to share out on our behalf? Did I hear Tina offer to do that?
Yeah, I think
No,
it's
you
Tina.
didn't.
I'm gonna sign off and run to the bathroom.
I am too.
All right. I'll see everybody back in the big room.
Okay.